a moment, Cheryl Burnett will acquaint you with your new knitting machine.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Brunette. The video you're about to see was produced in England by the makers of your Bond Classic. It's a visual version of some of the techniques that come with your written instructions with the machine, and a great help to those 85% of us who learn well by seeing something done. I was invited to narrate the American version of this tape, partly because I was raised in the Midwest and speak with a very American accent, but mostly because I've done this sort of thing before. Several years ago, I produced a series of 3 video classes using the original Blue Bond machine. Those classes teach you techniques that are different from the ones that you're going to see today, and they're available still through Bond America. For this program, I'm just the voice. The instructor is Sue Smith, a professional Bond instructor in England. Let's join her so that you can start making friends with your Bond Classic. With some practice, it won't be very long before you will be knitting pieces like the ones you see around me.
Before we begin, you'll need to put the 2 halves of your sweater machine together. Just snap them into place. Then on the back side, just use the plastic nut and bolt to fasten them together.
Attach your machine to a sturdy, level table by pushing the clamp through the hole in the front of the machine. Make sure the top of the clamp slides between the bed and the metal rod that's in there. The front-bottom edge should line up with the edge of the table. Do the same at the other side. Secure the clamps firmly. There are 4 different needle positions you need to know. Holding position. The needles don't knit when they're here. Forward working or half knit position, working position, and non-working position. The self-adhesive number should be attached here on the bed. Sue will begin by showing you how to cast on. Push the needles you want to cast on into holding position. There should be equal numbers of needles on each side of the center 0. Sue is using 60 needles. Place green cards behind the needles to hold them steady. Pick up the weighted cast-on hem and find the center, which is marked with a little hole above it.
Just 1 second. If you haven't already done so, slip the 4 rod weights into the hem. They'll overlap in the center.
That little hole goes right over the 0. Line up the cast-on hem so that 1 little plastic strip goes in each space between the needles. Lay the top of the hem on the needle bed. Use the 1-prong transfer tool or a spare hand knitting needle to open all the latches of the needles you are casting on. Take either the length of nylon cord or, like Sue, cut a length of elastic thread and lay it into the open hooks on the needles. Attach a small clip to each end for weight, and that will hold your thread or cord in place. Fold the hem over the elastic thread, making sure the plastic strips are between the needles and not resting on any of them, and push the hem back against the needle bed. Remove the green cards and replace them with the yellow card. Push the needles back against it, moving the yellow card as you go until they're all in forward working or half knit position. Remove the yellow card. Hook the carriage over the rail along the back of the bed. Open the handle and attach the wire fabric guide. Make sure that the wire slips into those 2 little slots on each side of the carriage. Close the handle and your carriage will move freely on the needle bed. Use key plate 3 for your practice knitting, which you should wax according to your instructions before using. Insert the key plate by raising the handle and putting it into the carriage, making sure it slips under the 2 pips in the back. Check again to make sure that all your needle latches are open. Use the ball of yarn in the box to practice. Pull out several lengths of yarn from the center of the ball and place it on the floor behind the table. Thread the carriage by bringing the yarn forward through the slot, down through the eye, and behind the fabric guide. Line up the eye of the carriage with the first working needle, and with both hands firmly on the handle, push the carriage across slowly. You've now done an open cast-on. To get the loose end of yarn out of your way, take it behind the hem and attach a third clip to it. Take the slack out until the eye of the carriage is over the first working needle, then drop the yarn and knit the row. Always use two hands on the carriage. Stop after every couple of rows to pull out several yards of yarn from your yarn ball because it needs to be free-flowing with no tension on it as you knit. Always take the slack out at the beginning of each row by holding the yarn until you start. If you don't take the slack up at the beginning of the row, a loop forms there, and you don't want that. Continue knitting this way for several rows. When your piece gets long enough for the hem to hit your knees, move it forward so that it can hang freely. You need the weight of the hem to pull down on your knitting in order for the machine to knit properly. Here's just one of many ways to increase a stitch. At the beginning of the row, bring forward one needle to working position. Check sure to make sure the latch is open. Knit the row. You have now increased one stitch. Let's see that again. Forward to working position. She opens the latch and knits the row. Let's look at one way to decrease. Using the single prong transfer tool, bring the needle forward and transfer the stitch to the next needle. Push the empty needle back to non-working position and knit 2 rows. Again, pull the needle out and lift the stitch. Place it onto the next needle. Notice that Sue holds her knitting with her other hand, and she works with the transfer tool parallel to the floor. You can decrease at both ends of the same row if you wish. You can use the 3-prong transfer tool in the same way to decrease fully fashioned. Pull out the end 3 needles, push them all the way back and lift. Then move the stitches over one needle. There are 2 stitches on the 3rd needle in from the end. You have now decreased 1 stitch, fully fashioned, which just means that the decrease is moved in from the edge of your knitting. Sue will show you 2 methods for casting off or binding off, beginning with a chain stitch cast off. Transfer the end stitch to the next needle. This is the same thing you did when you made the first decrease. Bring that needle forward and lay the yarn into the hook. Push the needle back, knitting the 2 stitches together. Continue this way across the row. Keep this row nice and loose by pushing each needle all the way to the back of the bed as you knit the stitches together. As you remove the bound-off stitches from the needles, the weighted hem starts to pivot and hang diagonally on you. You want to keep it level, so hook the cast-off edge onto a couple of the empty needles. At the end of the row, cut the yarn leaving 5 or 6 inches and pull that end through the last stitch. Carefully remove the knitting from the needles. The second method, the backstitch cast-off, is one that can be used on finished edges that will be visible. Measure a length of yarn 3 times the width of your knitting and cut it. Thread it through a darning needle. Notice that Sue ended with her carriage on the left and will be working from left to right with this bind-off. Insert the needle into the second stitch, bringing it back through the first stitch. Pull the yarn through. Now through the third and back through the second. She'll work this way all the way across the row. When you reach the last stitch, pull the yarn through to fasten it off and remove the knitting by pulling all the needles forward to holding position. Then push the needles back to non-working position. Your knitting will automatically drop off. Sue is now going to show you one way to add ribbing to your knitting as you would at the bottom of a sweater piece. She's going to work the same number of needles as she did with her piece of knitting, but she's arranging them so that there are 2 forward and 1 back all the way across the row. Put the yellow card between the needles to keep the forward needles in holding position. Pick up the cast-on row of stitches and hook them onto the needles. To do this, pick up the first 2 stitches and hang them on the last 2 needles. Leave the 3rd stitch in the elastic thread and hook up the 4th and 5th. Continue hooking up your stitches this way across the row, leaving every 3rd stitch in the elastic thread. Be sure that you're getting the stitches there and not the little loops that are between the 2 stitches. Remove the yellow card and push the needles back into working position. You just move the whole weighted hem there. Rethread the carriage and knit regularly until you have the number of rows you need for your ribbing. You end up with a series of ladders. With the latch hook tool, hook facing down, pick up the 3rd stitch which you left attached to the elastic thread. Turn the tool over so that the hook is up and push the stitch behind the latch. As you bring the tool back, pull the first rung of the ladder through your stitch. Hook up the remainder of the ladder in the same way. Forward, back, forward, back. When you reach the top, hook the new stitch onto the empty needle. Here, Sue is latching up some stitches at the other end of her knitting at normal speed. Use the back stitch method to cast off this style of ribbing. Remove the knitting from the machine. See how she jiggles that a little bit sometimes. Remove the knitting from the cast-on hem by either gently pulling through the nylon cord or gently pulling the knitting away from the hem, snipping the elastic as you go. Notice how Sue is tugging lengthwise on her knitting. While it's on the machine, your knitting is stretched wider than it will be when it's finished. Her tugging helps the stitches come back to the shape they want to be in naturally. Sue will show you some decorative stitches starting with the lace or eyelet stitch. Transfer the first stitch to the adjacent needle just as you did for the decrease. Bring the empty needle forward into holding position and knit 1 row. Push the needle back to forward working position, making sure the latch is open. Knit 1 row. That makes an eyelet. Many eyelets make a lace pattern. Sue is making a V-shaped pattern. You can position the lace anywhere on your knitting and can arrange the eyelets to make a wide variety of patterns. Latch is open, and she knits back. Now Sue will show you the tuck stitch. This is a very simple stitch that creates texture. Push into holding position the needles you want to be tucked. Sue pushed out every 10th needle, leaving 9 working needles between the ones she wants to tuck. Knit 2 rows. Pull down on the knitting, then push the needles back, checking that the latches are open. Whenever those needles are in forward working position, the latches must be open. Knit 1 row. Position the needles for the next row of the pattern by pushing them into holding position. She's using the center stitch of each group of 9 that she left. Knit 2 rows. Pull down on the knitting and push the needles back to forward working position. You can place tucks anywhere on your knitting, and by arranging them in an organized way, you can create hundreds of patterns. The purl side becomes the right side of these fabrics. Fair Isle is a method of knitting more than one color in a row. It's sometimes called jacquard or stranded knitting. Start by pushing into holding position the needles where you would like the contrasting color. Sue will knit her contrast color on every 3rd needle. Always knit the main color first by pushing the carriage slowly across the row. Then you'll knit the contrast color manually. Make sure that these stitches are the same size as the rest of your knitting. Notice that she's not pulling too tightly, nor is she leaving big loops. Make sure as you lay the yarn into the latch that it's open. When you finish that first row, attach a clip to the new yarn end. Then, select the needles for the contrast color of the second pattern row. Sue's moving 1 needle to the right on each row to form a diagonal pattern. Knit across with the main color, then manually knit the contrast color across the row. Look at the nice rhythm she has. This is how the back looks with the contrasting floats carried between the pattern stitches, and this is the right side. Sue will now show you how to knit a 6-stitch cable. Remove onto waste yarn 1 stitch on each side of the 6 needles that you're going to use for the cable. Push the empty needles into the non-working position. Remove the 3 right stitches onto the transfer tool and hook them on the side to get them out of your way. Using the other tool, transfer the 3 left-hand stitches onto the 3 needles that you just emptied. Then, Transfer the other 3 stitches across to the 3 needles on the left. You have now made a cable twist. Push the 6 needles into the forward working position, being sure the latches are open. Bring to forward working position an extra needle on each side. That makes it easier to knit this next row. Knit a total of 6 rows. Repeat the cable cross every 6th row just like this. There are hundreds of variations of cables that you can work following this crossing principle. Latch up the ladders with the latch hook tool. Notice how Sue is holding down on the knitting with her other hand. For a long cable, you'll find it easier to latch up the ladders in stages, every 20 rows or so. This was just like you did the ribbing. When you reach the top of the ladder, hook the stitch onto the empty needle. Do the same with the second ladder. This is what this cable looks like from the right side. Now Sue will show you a way to knit intarsia or picture knitting. For intarsia, you'll need to remove the fabric guide and the yarn from the carriage. Use one of the cards to bring all the needles up to forward working position. Make sure that those latches are open. If they're not, you'll drop a stitch. That's why I keep reminding you about this. Lay the main color into the needle hooks you want to carry that color. Place the contrast color into the needle hooks that you want to carry that yarn. Guide the loose ends by letting them feed gently through your hands and push the carriage slowly across to knit the row. Position the needles for the second row, bringing them forward to forward working position. Check to make sure that those latches are open. Bring the yarns back across in the opposite direction into the needles, moving one needle to the right, but this time crossing the yarns under the needle hook where they join. This prevents a hole. Hold on to the loose ends and bring the carriage across, making sure you don't pull too tightly on those loose ends of the yarn. Let them feed evenly through your fingers. Continue positioning your needles into forward working position. Place the yarn into the open hooks, crossing them where they join. Sue's using 2 colors in a simple diagonal design, but you can use as many colors as you want on the same row. Remember, don't hold the yarns too tightly because your stitches will be too tight, or you might even prevent the carriage from knitting. To close the hole at the beginning, use the latch tool to pull the loose end of yarn through the crossover stitch. You can work that in later. And here's our basic diagonal design. This next section has been designed to help you with some problems you may meet as you practice your knitting. If the carriage jams, it usually means that there's a needle out of line. The main cause for this is you've gone too quickly across the row. If you lift the handle, you can see where the needle butt's bumping up against the guides and the key plate. Gently tugging down on your knitting will usually release that needle. And once it's released, you can replace the handle and continue knitting. If you need to unravel a row, pull the yarn sideways and lift it out of the needle hooks back to the beginning of the row. Open the handle and remove the key plate. Then you can slide the carriage all the way across and replace the key plate on the other side. Pull up all that slack yarn and you're ready to knit again. A drop stitch is easy to pick up. Use the one-prong transfer tool to pick up the drop stitch and put it onto the empty needle. Push the needle forward so that the stitch goes behind the latch. Then pick up the lower ladder and put it on the hook. Knit the stitch through. Do the same for the second ladder and pull the knitting down.
That covers the basics. And remember, there are lots of accessories available that can really help you get the most from your incredible sweater machine. Like the extension kit, which you'll use to make afghans and larger garments. Each has 30 needles, and you can add as many as you like. And there's the automatic row counter to help you keep track of all those rows you knit so quickly. It's especially helpful when knitting intricate patterns.